trying to finish up this Bassman reissue so we can compare it to that actual 58 Bassman we have here at the same time. You can see here the Illinois caps are gone. Along with the Illinois caps, all the hum and problems this amp had have also left. Surprise, surprise. We've got some MODs here. We've got dual 100 microfarad 350s in series for the reservoir node, dual 40 microfarad 500 volts in series for the screen node, and the other two caps are inside. More on that later. You can see here the input jacks protrude just a little bit. These are long bushing jacks that they used. They had a single tooth washer, and they were really sticking out. I put a second tooth washer, and now they're only sticking out a little bit more than they would on the real deal. I don't know why they used the long bushing jacks there. I might change that because it's easily done, and these jacks would be useful in other. The long bushing jacks are very useful to have in a lot of amps, but not on this one. That's not that important. One thing I need to sort out is that this screw here, which holds the choke in place, is not tight and cannot be tightened. It's free spinning. It's a sheet metal screw, and once that goes, that goes. I think there's just room inside the chassis for me to replace this with a number 6 machine screw, which will then take a bolt, a nut rather, on the other side. Here's the other side of those input jacks, and you can see the double washers there, and they're still coming out of the chassis too much on the other side. More importantly, you can see the two 20 microfarad caps here. You can see the space here where there used to be a third. This one here is the phase inverter one, and that's 20 like it is on the real deal. But here, these two were in parallel with each other, and they were both 22 microfarad. That was 44 microfarad in total. The original Bassman had 8 microfarad there. Now, 8 versus 10, you won't hear a difference. 10, 22, this is a 20. Arguably, there's a difference. Arguably, the 20 or 22 is a little bit better, though maybe less authentic. But 44, really? That's a good way to have a very stiff, very, very stiff feeling preamp. So I've got a 22 here. I could change that to a 10, but pulling the board again, unless it's necessary for something else that comes up in testing, is just a major, major pain and not worth it, I don't think. I've already corrected Fender's biggest mistake by removing that extra cap, but how good do I want to make this and have it still say Fender versus saying me? It's the problem with making amps better. You make it really good, and then someone says, oh, he played that brand's model of amp, and I will go buy that same brand and that same model, and I'll have that sound. No, it was an amp that someone did a lot of work to undo the factory goofs. Speaking of factory goofs, about 4 of these wires going from this board to this board pulled right out of this board. The wires were going through the holes, and there was solder on the other side, and the solder was attached to the pads and traces on the other side, but the solder had never adhered to the wires. There was no solder connection to the wires. They were just being held in place, and they would have been vibrating and making intermittent connections. So all that has been redone. Ended up having to replace this yellow wire because as soon as heat hit it, the insulation melted up about 1/2 inch. So it's got one little 2-inch section of really high quality wire, and the rest is factory, but now, connected for the first time in its history. Down here, you can see the screen grid resistors have been removed, and a wire run from the screen to the octal socket, and that's where the new 3-watt 470 ohm screen grid resistors are. Similarly, the green wires that were going to the heater circuit over in this area have been removed and gone to the octal socket, and the heater balance resistors are left on the board. I think they're there. I can't really see what I'm doing right now, but they're not connected to anything. Neither is the old heater fuse, but you can see or you will see soon, they're over here, the added heater balance resistors, which does a better job. And if they were to burn, they won't burn the board, though the new ones are flame-proof. So just taking some of the hot stuff off the board and moving it over to the octals where it belongs. Here's a somewhat better view. You can see the two 470 ohm grid stoppers, screen grids. The grid stoppers stayed on the board just due to physical layout. And you can see the heater balance resistors here, the focus in this area is a bit tight. These U-shaped tweed chassis are a little bit tough to show things in. Here are the output tubes the amp had when it came in, and when I first powered it on with a fairly cool bias, this tube was drawing about 41%. This one was drawing about 39%. So I thought, that's good. That's good. Despite the discoloration, they're working. But when I started to really dial in the bias, or attempt to, with 120 volts coming out of the wall, and plate voltage of 456, this tube was biased about 57%. Great. But this one's shot up to 70%. So we had 41 and 39 at a low voltage, low bias setting. And then as the bias came up, this one started to drift. So 70, 57, not good. So this tube has got to go away. So I'm going to put in a different pair of 6L6s to test this. I'm going to set that bias, and then we're going to see what the B plus is when a good pair of tubes is biased about 60% at 120 volts coming out of the wall. And then I expect we'll probably want to decrease the rectifier tube from this 5AR4 to a 5U4GB to get the B plus down to where this would have been in 1958, 1959 to make this feel and sound more like an original. Who knows, it might sound better than the original. We'll find out once the output tubes are good. So with the known good pair of 6L6s, there's no difference in current draw from this location to this location. So the issue is definitely the old groove tubes, not in the amp. Interestingly, with the wall voltage set to 120, some good tubes, and a GZ34 5AR4, the stock rectifier tube, with the most negative bias setting the amp can do, which was 47.5 volts. We had a B plus of 453, and the tubes were at 61.4 and 60.8% dissipation, so close to perfect. So 60% is as hot as the bias supply in the bias circuit in this amp can provide. I could tweak that. When I changed the rectifier to a 5U4GB, the bias is still the same, negative 47. The wall voltage is the same, 120. The tubes are now at 42% idle dissipation, and the B plus is at 443. So we've had a 10 voltage drop from 453 to 443 on the B plus, but the bias has gone down 20%. The bias has gone from 60% to 42%, almost 43. So in order to get these to bias at 60% with the with the 5U4GB, I would need to change the bias circuit to get it hotter. I think it needs to be changed to get a little bit hotter anyway, though 60% is not too bad with modern wall voltages. At the same time, that's with the 453 plate. If I were to increase the bias with this 5U4, I think the B plus would be down around 420, 430 rather than 450, which would be more authentic. So I will show this video to the owner and talk about it, whether we make a slight change just to decrease the bias, but we stay with the GZ34, or whether we do the bias change a little bit more and go with the 5U4GB and make this thing sound a little bit more like the real deal. Until then, let you hear what this amp is sounding like now that the output is not all distorted and hummy. So it's still a bit noisier than the real deal 58. Some of that might be the old preamp tubes. These are the stock ones that came in. Doesn't have any shielding on it, but then again, neither does the old one. It's just a little bit hissier, which is aggravating, but much better than it was when it came in, and it was pretty much unplayable due to the distortion and low volume and the hum. So this thing will be a lot louder when I turn it up, but this is as loud as I need to hear it right now to know that it's working correctly. And this is obviously not through its own speakers. This is through a super reverb that's here with the same 2 ohm load with the 4x10 setup. So it's fine for testing, but it's not this is not the whole effect. You'll get that when this amp is done. But first, I need to talk to the owner. Until then, thanks for watching.